Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. Be patient therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take my brethren the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath. But let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. Is any among you afflicted? Let him pray. Is any merry? Let him sing psalms. Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. And if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Elijah was a man subject to like passions as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next reading we're going to have today on this February 27th, 2019, of the book, The Divine Program of the World's History by Albert Close, and it's going to be read with Jörg Glissman and commentary by myself and also Daryl Eberhardt. And I want to welcome both of you to the mic, and looking forward to continuing in our reading right now. We are doing and we're discussing quite a bit to do with Bible prophecy, aren't we?
Yeah, we sure are, and it's good to be on with you.
Great, wonderful. It's great to have both of you. You know, it's such a rare thing that we can find the time in the middle of the week to all three of us can get together. For me, speaking for myself, I think both Daryl and Jörg, you probably open a bit more than me, but still, we're all busy and we have different things going on at different times. And there's been times where we have missed each other for appointments and things like that because of things that come up. So I'm just hoping that the grace of the Lord will be upon us and that we can come together despite our differences and make some good commentary and help out those of us in the world that are stuck with false teaching and false doctrine that has really invaded pretty much every sector of life as we know it today. And with that, I'll just leave it right to Jörg then.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and it's wonderful every time that we come together. Today is, by the way, the 13th session of that reading of Albert Close's book. And seeing that we are on page 52 of, I don't know how many pages it has, but that means that we still have probably the majority of the book still to go, of course. And whether it's in the middle of the week like today or it's in the weekend, it's every time a pleasure to be with you two, and that we can exchange our knowledge that we have, our wisdom that we get from the Bible, and the other wisdom that we get from reading these books that are exposing the Jesuitical lie of futurism, which is the greatest deception since the Garden of Eden. And with that, Satan lures most of quote-unquote humanity into the road of perdition that he is strolling along ever since he rebelled in heaven, as we can read in Isaiah chapter 14. So, without any further ado, I would really like to go to the book, and you brothers know that whenever you want to interrupt me, you want to get a say in this book, then you just call me out, please. And I will, of course, try not to read too fast. Again, as I just told Daryl also a little time ago, I didn't have any time to prepare anything, so this is for me, it's the first time to read it, so bear with me when here and there I maybe pronounce a word wrong, or I have to get a moment to get the real understanding of what is written here anyway. Now, we are starting on page 53, not 52, and it's sub-chaptered Futurist Confused as the Jesuits Planned. That is a little bit misunderstandable when you read the sentence like this. It should read Protestants confused by futurism as Jesuits planned, I think. Yes, Daryl?
Before you start, there's something very important that I read just a couple days ago in the Bible, and this will only take a minute or two, but I wanted to say this.
Oh, please.
And that is, it's very important to read not only the New Testament in the Old King James Bible, but it's also very important to read the Old Testament. And a couple days ago, I was reading in 2 Kings, and now a lot of people don't bother with the Old Testament. If they do, they'll just read Psalms and Proverbs. But you miss a lot of gems when you skip all those books. And don't forget that the Lord Jesus Christ quoted from Deuteronomy in Luke, in the Gospel of Luke, when he said that we're to live by every word of God. And just two real quick things that I saw in the last couple days in 2 Kings is the importance of prayer. And Hezekiah had 185,000 troops coming against him of the Assyrians, Sennacherib. And what did Hezekiah do? Did he go crying and figure he's all done for, and did he run away and hide and go flee to Florida to spend the winter? No. Hezekiah took that letter that Sennacherib was telling, that you guys are all gone for, because the Syrians were pretty nasty fighters and that, and they skinned people alive, by the way, they're captives and that. And they said, we're going to get you and that, and he took that letter and he took it before the Lord. He took it to the Lord, and he says, this guy's not only reproaching us, he's reproaching you. So he took that letter. He had a problem. 185,000 hostile troops outside waiting to lay siege to Jerusalem. And he took that letter to God. And the other thing is, Hezekiah, and by the way, he was one of the better kings in Judah, Hezekiah found out Isaiah the prophet went to see him, and God says, go tell old Hezekiah he's a dead man. He's going to die. Set his house in order, he says, and set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. And Isaiah wasn't even out of the courtyard, and the Lord told him, hey, go on back, because this guy's crying out to me and hollering. And God gave Hezekiah, he gave him 15 additional years of life. So God had said, you're a dead man. And then God changed his mind and gave him... So whenever the situation looks bad, 185,000 troops getting ready to surround you, or when you find out that you maybe been told you're going to die, take it to the Lord. That's all I wanted to say. I just thought, I read those in the last couple of days, and I couldn't wait to tell people that's important. That's all the way back in the Old Testament and 2 Kings. So anyway, good to be on with you.
It's a very good point that you made, that Daryl, especially since I told you an hour ago when we were on the phone privately that I got diagnosed with MS a few years ago. And that's kind of a death sentence that is hanging over your head every time, isn't it? Because that's that kind of a disease that is not curable. But I don't really care for it that I have it or that I was diagnosed with it. I don't even know if I still have it, because I personally think giving me that disease or the diagnosis a few years ago, that was just God kicking me in the butt, telling me to get up and stand up for His word, and I did ever since, and I didn't have any problem with the disease ever since. But what we should never do, and that is the point that Daryl made, is we should not get out of Dodge because we are afraid of something. We don't have to be afraid of anything in this world, because we live in the peace and the freedom with which Jesus Christ our Lord made us free. There's nothing in this world that can harm us, because we don't have to fear the one who can destroy the flesh and the earth, but we have to fear the one who can destroy the flesh and the soul in hell. And that's just the thing that I want to end this with.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, the Lord toasted those 185,000 Assyrian troops. They, the guy, the king or whatever, woke up in the morning and all of his men were dead around him. God took care of those 185,000 troops.
Like it took care. Like it took care of the Spanish Armada.
Yep. Amen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
good
right.
point.
Yeah. You know, the power of the Lord is something that many people just don't understand. They don't get it because they have lost their faith. They only believe in things they can see, touch, hear, and smell. And with God you just have to have faith. And the Bible says you are rewarded for that, because the righteous man shall live by faith. That's what Romans chapter 1 verse 17 says. Anyway, before getting into the reading, because, you know, we just read this one sentence, futurist confused as the Jesuits planned. I think this should read Protestants confused by futurism as the Jesuits planned, to make it more understandable what it's really all about. Now, when you want to know what impact futurism has on Protestants, I'm going to read to you a little quote from, in this case, I think, I don't even know where that comes from. I've heard that Tom Friess quoting that once out of his books, probably. It says, "The Jesuitical lie of futurism is the victory of Romanism over Protestantism." That's a very good way to put it. The Jesuitical lie of futurism is the victory of Romanism over Protestantism. That's one of the quotes that I really wanted to share with you before we go into this understanding of the book here. There's another quote that comes from The Origins of Futurism and Preterism. That is a very interesting little book, by the way, to read, where it says, quote, "Though mutually exclusive, either Jesuit alternative," speaking of futurism and preterism, "suited the great objective equally well. Both thrust aside the application of the prophecies from the existing Church of Rome." And in this book of Albert Close we are dealing with futurism and preterism. For the moment we have only studied futurism, and we are still going to continue, but we will also encounter preterism. And this little quote that I just read to you deals with both of them. So, let me repeat this first sentence in this book. Futurists confused as the Jesuits planned should read Protestants confused by futurism as the Jesuits planned. So we come to the third point, because we were reading 4 different points here, or even more. We started a few points of explaining to us. Let me just see where's point 1, that I just can go back to that. That comes when you don't prepare your reading. You have to see where you left off. On the papacy and the beast. So, replying to a futurist article in the Protestant Observer in July 1912, the papacy and the beast, Porcilli says, in substance, 4 different points. We are on the third point now. This third point that he says is, quote, "The fourth wild beast power as all historians relate, was established not under the Empire, meaning pagan Rome, but under the earlier Commonwealth. The subsequent accessing of territory westward from Rome had no reference to Israel, and therefore does not enter the picture limned by inspiration further than as 10 toes on the figure, or 10 horns on the head of the fourth power. The head of figure in Daniel chapter 2 denotes the easternmost limit of the picture. Yeah? There is nothing more eastern than Babylon. So don't come with India and China and all that stuff. That is not of importance of anything here in this Bible study. Yeah? The head of the figure in Daniel 2, speaking of Babylon, of the head of gold, denotes the easternmost limit of the picture, whilst the opposite members, the toes, obviously denote the westernmost limit. So if that is true, then we don't speak of America in this regard. And the question is, do we speak of the United States of America in Revelation chapter 13? Just a question I put here to remind you that we all have to do and go into our own, probably a little bit deeper studies of Bible prophecy, if Revelation chapter 13, all points mentioned there really are fulfilled by the United States of America. Or is that maybe just a distraction from some people to divert the attention from the real second beast, that we are all blinded by a false teaching in this regard? Could it be possible? That's just the question I'm asking. I'm asking this as well to Daryl and Bret as I'm asking that to all you guys out there on the screens watching and listening to this video. Could it be possible? Aren't the Jesuits that conniving, that subtle in their deceptions, that they always try to divert the spotlight from the real culprit to somebody they want to make the culprit? Don't we have examples for this in history more than enough?
We've got plenty of examples.
Yeah, why don't you come up with one, Daryl, please?
Yeah, number one is they blame the Jews for striving after world dominance and world domination, and it's the Jesuits who are the
originator of anti-Semitism, huh?
Yeah, sheesh. And
There's
to
a
get to that
example.
information.
And of course, the other good example is, as you well know, is the Jesuits coming up with preterism and futurism in order to get Protestants looking elsewhere and get the spotlight off the papacy as being the historical Antichrist.
Absolutely.
So they got preterism looking in the past. They got futurism, having them look way far at the end of the future for many of these evangelicals in America, figuring, we won't even be here. Why should we be worried about the Antichrist when the Antichrist
even if he comes, Daryl, even if he comes, we'll be raptured out anyway.
Yep, that is big, and that's big in the United States, in the fundamental and independent Baptist, etc. Real big, because they're all big on the CI Schofield study and reference Bible, etc.
And also the charismatic movement, isn't it?
Yes.
That has gone rampant since the beginning of the 20th century in the United States of America. And that is all about rapture and Holy Spirit taking us away and all that stuff. Yeah? Good point, Daryl. Thanks.
Yeah, and they don't. Go ahead.
No, anything more, I just ask. Do you have something more to add, please? That was my question.
No, go ahead.
Because I interrupted you, so I just wanted to say maybe you have something more to say to this point. It's a very, very interesting point that you made. Yeah.
Well, it is a gateway for sure. The Pentecostal charismatic movement is where they got a lot of the evangelicals to connect up with the Roman Catholics. because speaking in tongues and all these spiritual experiences and meditation, etc., all of that ties in with, of course, Eastern mysticism and everything, ties in with the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola. All of these things are tying together and drawing together this gigantic ecumenical movement that's like a locomotive racing down a mountain. It's gaining and gaining and gaining speed. So, yeah, very good point to make that Pentecostal charismatic movement was a big gateway for, or bridge connecting Roman Catholicism to many of the evangelicals. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. I'm just putting out a few pictures here of the charismatic movement that the viewer of the video can imagine what we are talking about here, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. And I'm just reading a book on the charismatic movement, but in German, that has been published in English under the title, let me just see, got the German one here, it's called in English, it's called A Different Gospel, and it is written by D.R. McConnell, and I can advise this book to read to get an understanding of the founding of the charismatic movement, but of course you have to understand that the author himself is a charismatic himself. So always be careful when you read books like these. You have to very much read between the lines. But let's go to our book here. Let's go back to our book here. The head of the figure in Daniel 2 denotes the easternmost limit of the picture, whilst the opposite members, the toes, obviously denote the westernmost limits. I personally have never understood it this way, but it's very interesting and it sounds absolutely correct. The entire picture hinges round Israel's oppression and dispersion by Gentile powers, and only in so far as the wild beasts impine upon that history are they used by God to depict the future. Therefore we should read Luke chapter 21, verse 24, Zechariah chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. Now, I don't know about Zechariah, but I know about Luke, and I remember that last time we spoke already about that. I showed you the verse that the Jews are being brought out of the land and Jerusalem being trodden down until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. That, in that regard, that is what Luke 21 verse 24 says. So we're coming to the fourth point now, stating the seat of power and the dominating head of the fourth wild beast is never represented at Constantinople or Jerusalem or elsewhere but Rome. This is shown in Daniel chapter 2 by the iron and by the removal of supremacy from Babylon to Rome. In Daniel chapter 7 by the iron teeth, the bestial 10-horned head, and the actions of the last of fourth power, meaning in Revelation chapter 13 verse 2, unquote. Oh, unquote. That's not quote. Do we have here Revelation chapter 13, which I just spoke about a few minutes ago? I didn't read it in advance, I told you, so read it again. This is shown in Daniel chapter 2 by the iron, speaking of the seat of the power. The seat of the power, keep that in your head. This is shown in Daniel chapter 2 by the iron and by the removal of supremacy from Babylon to Rome. In Daniel chapter 7 by the iron teeth, the bestial 10-horned head, and the actions of the last of fourth power. Revelation chapter 13 verse 2. If the futurists' supposition about an eastern and a western half-empire were correct, then the western half devoured and brake in pieces and stamped its feet the eastern half of its own body. No, the fourth beast stamped upon the other beasts and tore them with its iron legions or teeth. It is never identified with any of the other beasts, either in Daniel or in Revelation. It is a grave error to confuse them together as the futurists do, but this is exactly what the Jesuits planned they should do. 5. The little horn and the head of this fourth power, or strictly Latin and Roman Commonwealth west of the Adriatic, is the papacy. The little horn is the papacy, the fourth power itself being the persecuting, Satan-inspired and Rome-centered Latin Commonwealth, west of the third beast, or Medo-Greek territorial power, i.e. modern Greece and Turkey. This little horn arose, as foretold, among the 10 Latino-Gothic horns on the head of the fourth beast, when that fourth beast assumed its final form of a 10-kingdom commonwealth under an episcopal, Daniel chapter 7 verse 8, instead of a Caesarean, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 7, Revelation chapter 13 verse 2 dynasty, which you can read in Revelation chapter 11 verse 7, 13 5, and 17 11 and 12. Now, without all these quotations in brackets, we're going to read the sentence again for a good understanding. This little horn arose, as foretold, among the 10 Latino-Gothic horns on the head of the fourth beast, when that fourth beast assumed its final form of a 10-kingdom commonwealth under an episcopal instead of a Caesarean dynasty. Point 6. The Romano-Latin Commonwealth is indicated in the Apocalypse or Revelation repeatedly in varying forms and epochs of its existence. Therefore, you can read in Revelation chapter 12 verses 3 and 4, chapter 13 verse 1, chapter 17 verses 3 through 7, but always as one 10-horned wild beast, the fourth beast of Daniel. The papacy, which supplanted the Caesars, on the other hand, is depicted not only as a wild beast, Revelation chapter 9 verse 7, 13 verses 3 through 8, 19 verse 9, 14 verse 9, 16 verse 13, 17 verse 8, 11 and 13, and Revelation 19 verse 19, but also as the eighth head of the Romano-Latin Commonwealth, as we can read in Revelation chapter 17 verse 11 and in Revelation 13 verse 3. It is further distinguished from the fourth wild beast by being repeatedly placed in religious and ecclesiastical confederacy with another wild beast, Revelation chapter 13 verses 11 through 18, Revelation 16 verse 13 and 19 verse 20, called the false prophet or sham Christian preaching class, which clerical assistant acts by the express sanction and authority of the papacy or eighth bestial head, as we can read in Revelation chapter 13 verses 12 through 14, styled quote-unquote the first wild beast. So here the author goes into the second beast of Revelation 13, right? It is further distinguished from the fourth wild beast by being repeatedly placed in religious and ecclesiastical confederacy with another wild beast. And that is Revelation chapter 13 verses 11 through 18, the second beast that comes out of the earth, right? Called the false prophet, or sham Christian preaching class, which clerical assistant acts by the express sanction and authority of the papacy, or eighth bestial head, styled the first wild beast. And these two anti-Christian wild beasts, the papacy or papal dynasty and the priestly hierarchy, are simultaneously to be destroyed by the Lord's second advent. That's something that we can read in Revelation 19 verse 20 and Daniel chapter 7 verse 11. These two anti-Christian wild beasts. So if I understand this correctly, and you correct me if I don't understand it correctly, speaks of Revelation chapter 13, the two beasts. These two anti-Christian wild beasts, the papacy being one, and the priestly hierarchy being another, are simultaneously to be destroyed by the Lord's second advent. So here's an explanation what the second beast is, right? It's the priestly hierarchy. You have the papacy on the top, which is one beast, and you have the priestly hierarchy, which is the second beast. Now, this is an interesting point of view, isn't it, brothers? What do you think? Do you have some thoughts on that, what I just read here? Or am I interpreting something in the text that isn't there? Help me out here.
No, I think
I don't think you're
right.
No, it's pretty spot on. But if you want to put a label on it precisely, is it a state power? I think this is pointing to a priestly hierarchy and not a temporal, quote unquote, ruler. Is it?
Yeah. Don't forget that in the very first chapter of the book Rulers of Evil, we have the quote from a Roman Catholic bishop, I don't know his name by heart now, who says the Roman Catholic Church is a state. Okay?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So this was
right.
11 through 18, right? So this is this part. Now, let's just go back to the PDF we were just reading. It says here, and these two anti-Christian wild beasts, the papacy of papal dynasty, and the priestly hierarchy, are simultaneously to be destroyed by the Lord's second advent. So the second advent is described in Revelation 19 verse 20 and in Daniel chapter 7 verse 11. But before that we read Revelation chapter 13 verses 12 through 14 that we have these 8 bestial head. So 12 through 14, that's a little bit less what I highlighted here. 12 through 14 it says, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast. So speaking of the second beast now. Verse 11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. If you ask me, this is a wonderful explanation of the false prophet. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Fire in the sense of gospel, but another gospel than the one that Paul preached and warned of. And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live. I guess this asks for a little bit or deeper study than we are able to do right now. But the point that I want to make is, when you read this in that understanding, and you see Revelation 13 here, and that all of a sudden you see there is another possibility than the second beast having to be the United States of America. If I am not mistaken. At least that is an understanding that I get from this.
Well, that's not to say that the United States doesn't have anything to do with this, Jörg.
No.
It sure does.
No. No, the United States...
Yeah.
Listen, this is a very important point, and then we go really into history. The United States has more or less been founded by Jesuits, because they came over in the Ark and the Dove in 1634. And they prepared the field, they did the planting, they did the watering, they cared for the plants, and then they came back to harvest. And the harvest was 1776, when through the Declaration of Independence, and then later on the Constitution of the new founded United States of America, all of a sudden religious freedom was introduced. Religious freedom that only gave freedom to Roman Catholics to fornicate with their superstitious religion, because they were banned before that. They were not allowed to build churches, they were not allowed to hold mass, they were not allowed to hold offices, they were not allowed to elect. Their franchise was taken away from them, it says in some books. So freedom of religion in the United States of America only helped one class of people, and that was the Romanists. That was the papists. So the point that I'm going to make is when we read this here is, of course, United States of America, that's the point that Bret wanted to put out. Of course the United States of America has its role, because it is the military arm of the beast. You know, the beast itself doesn't have power but spiritual. But the United States of America have all the military wealth in this world, right? And I don't think that we should let bypass the possibility of get an explanation of what I just said of someone who is a really former insider, Daryl. He has been working for years and years in the military-industrial complex. He knows all about that. But therefore, the United States of America doesn't have to be the second beast, but it has a sure role in the end time, surely in the military point of view of this world. What do you think of that, Daryl? Am I correct there?
Well, for sure. Take a look at NATO. Take a look at the UN. And now the U.S. hasn't had a long history of involvement with the UN, but there are UN troops in that, and foreign troops that train quite a bit in the United States of America, including at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and in New Mexico. And that, as a matter of fact, the German Air Force trains in, I think it's Alamogordo Air Force Base in New Mexico. But as a matter of fact, the German Air Force has part of the base. They own part of the base. So, yeah, the U.S. Very much involved with NATO and somewhat with the UN, but certainly in training a lot of foreign troops in the United States of America.
Enforcing the doctrine of the first beast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they don't have to be the second beast, but they are the military arm of the first beast.
And certainly America, when you look at America with its mostly European settlement in its early history, very, very much kind of an extension of Europe, Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, very much correct. I really start to like this book because it gives all of a sudden a different view that makes very much sense when you are at least daring to take off your mainstream Bible teaching glasses. That's always something that you should do. Anyway, let's continue reading. And these two anti-Christian wild beasts, the papacy or papal dynasty, and the priestly hierarchy, in this regard speaking of the first and second beast of Revelation 13, are simultaneously to be destroyed by the Lord's second advent, whereas the fourth wild beast, or Romano-Latin-Gothic Commonwealth, is not to be destroyed, but its dominion is to be given to the people of the saints, as we can read in Daniel chapter 7 verse 27, after it has fulfilled God's will in Revelation chapter 17 verse 17. In, quote, hating the whore, and making her desolate, and naked, eating her flesh, and burning her with fire, unquote, from Revelation chapter 17, verse 16, and 16, verse 19. Or, in other words, after the despoiling and disestablishment of the Church of Rome and its offshoots by the nations of Western Europe. Daniel chapter 7 is a mere outline view of their future history. Revelation is a later and more fully expanded and detailed history written in advance. Take a distant view of the Alps as an illustration. As we look at the crowded peaks, it seems as if they are all small peaks close together. But as we climb and reach these peaks, we find they are all great mountains, peaks themselves, separated by miles of valleys. So in the distance, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 seems only a horn. But as we come down to the ages to St. John's Day, we find this little horn is really a great beast ruling over subject kingdoms the same as the others. This agrees with the facts of European history. It must be borne in mind that this prophecy of Daniel takes up chiefly the political aspect of the great Antichrist, not his religious character. It views him as a persecuting monarch of the Roman world, not as a bishop of the Christian Church. It must be borne carefully in mind that the Pope claims to be both a priest and a king. Yeah, I have a very famous picture of that. I'm gonna show it to you in just a second. I guess Bret already knows which picture I'm getting out now, don't you?
Ah, boy.
Of course, the Pope wears not only the mitre, the Dagon fish cap, but he also wears a tiara, a triple crown.
That's right.
That's surely one point, but the picture that I put out here, Daryl, that is what you will see when you watch the video later, is Pope Francis entering into the joint session of Congress and Senate in the United States of America in 2015, raising up his right hand and greeting all the people who stretch out their hands just to touch this Antichrist for one in their life, and it's undertitled "All Hail Caesar." Because Antichrist Pope Pius IX in his discourse he said, quote, "The Caesar who now addresses you, and to whom alone are obedience and fidelity due." That is proof from the house's mouth itself that the Pope is an ecclesiastical as well as a temporal power. Because the Pope says the Caesar who now addresses you. Caesar is another word for emperor. Emperor is another word for a worldly ruler. So when the Pope speaks of himself as a worldly ruler who now addresses you and to whom alone are obedience and fidelity due, that to me is a perfect fulfilling of what we just read here. It must be borne carefully in mind that the Pope claims to be both a priest and a king, and this picture, I think, makes the point. St. Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 through 12, one of the utmost important parts of the New Testament in regard to the Antichrist to read, I can tell you, thus deals with the ecclesiastical aspect of Antichrist. Here, in Daniel's foreview, it is one little horn among 10, one little kingdom among 10 Latin kingdoms, though it seems in some senses ruling over them all. The question is, has there not been such a decay and diminution of papal sovereignty, such as wasting and weakening of papal power, such a loss of revenue, influence and territory, as may be fairly said to fulfill this prediction? There has been a very considerable growth of papal influence in England and in North America during the last 75 years. We remember the beginning of the Oxford movement after the Emancipation Act, 1829, and Oxford movement, 1833 through 1845. This is exactly what the author is speaking about here. Many so fix their gaze on these facts as to get an impression that the Roman papacy is gaining ground in the world generally. Now this is very far from being the case, as a glance at the comparative positions of the papacy in the 13th century and the two following ones with its position now in the 20th will show. I just want to add for the author here that something he didn't know at the time of the publishing of this book, of course. He was publishing this book, as we know, in 1916. 13 years later, by the Lateran Treaty, the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope of Rome, regained his temporal power that was taken away in 1870. Okay? Then Rome actually exercised and enforced the dominion which she can now only claim, because in this time of the writing of this book, that dominion was taken away and the wound that was that seemed deadly was still inflicted. Then, with the consent of his barons, the King of England agreed to hold his kingdom as the Pope's feudatory and to pay him annually 100,000 marks as an acknowledgement. Can you imagine King George V and the Lords and Commons of England agreeing to that sort of thing now? Then the great and valiant Henry IV, Emperor of Germany, stood for 3 winter days and nights barefoot in the courtyard of His Holiness at Canossa, waiting for the honor of an audience in which he might beg the Pope's pardon for having acted as an independent monarch. I think what we are reading right here is taken out of Romanism and the Reformation, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the Kaiser Wilhelm of Berlin doing that now? Then, wherever he pleased, the Pope could suspend all observances of religion, even to the burial of the dead and the marriage of the living, in any country with which he was offended. Yeah? He did that by excommunication. In what kingdom could he do so now? Because for the moment we are living in the time when the wound was inflicted. The deadly wound was afflicted. It wasn't deadly, we know that now, but at that moment that wound was afflicted to the papacy. You have to understand this while we're reading this. Long after his absolute dominion was gone, the Pope had what were called concordats with different nations, in which it was agreed that, in return for the Pope's spiritual support, they would uphold him by their armies and navies. Did you understand that well? In return for the Pope's spiritual support, they would uphold him by their armies and navies. Does the Roman Catholic Church, does the papacy need its own armies? No. The only thing it needs to do is have concordats. And there's an interesting website that you can look on that is called TDPOTWH. And there you can see all the concordats that are in the world ruling today. It gives you an explanation about what concordats are, and here you can look at all the countries, concordats by country. So, Argentina, Austria, Belarus, Brazil, Britain, Colombia, Cote d'Ivoire, Croatia, Czech Republic, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, France, Germany, Haiti, Hungary, Israel and Palestine, and so on and so on and so on. I just don't have to read them all. You can look at this website for yourself, and all these countries have a working concordat with the Vatican. Germany, by the way, this is why the picture of Adolf Hitler is still here. Germany, by the way, has its concordat since the 20th of July 1933, less than half a year after Hitler came to power. And all the denazification that took place after World War II, well, it overlooked the concordat. Because Italy had a early concordat, but that is done away with and later on renewed. Spain, also a fascist country as Germany and Italy, had a concordat with the Pope of Rome, or the Roman Catholic Church, but that was done away with and then later renewed. But the German Nazi concordat still is in working today in 2019 as I speak to you. Yeah? In a landmark in 2018 decision, the European Court Justice moved to restrict the power of German churches to require that all their employees be members. That's also interesting. By the way, with this concordat in Germany also was introduced the Kirchensteuer, which is the church tax, which is that in Germany, when you are a working person, you are being taxed. 10% of your personal income tax goes directly to the church. Did you know that? A lot of people don't. And this concordat is on the basis of that. Yeah? So it's interesting when we read here about the concordats, when we read here about that long after his absolute dominion was gone, the Pope had what were called concordats with different nations, in which it was agreed that in return for the Pope's spiritual support, these nations would uphold him by their armies and navies. So the power of the Pope is always upheld by countries who he signed concordats with, and I think I remember from Richard Bennett a time ago, 176 countries in the world today, 2019, have a working concordat with the Vatican. 176 of, I think, 198 nations. Some 90%.
Yeah, I've seen about 3 videos where he changes that. He and his friend, Pastor Bill Moncaro, come up with numbers of 177, 179. The key point is that they have diplomatic relations with a lot of countries in the world. They have papal nuncios assigned to those. As a matter of fact, Pope Pius XII, the wartime Pope, Eugenio Pacelli, at one time was a papal nuncio. I think he was in Germany.
Between 1917 and 1929. He first reigned out from Munich in the south of Germany, and then later in the 1920s, I think 1923, he went on to Berlin. And then he stopped in early 1929, and he became Secretary of State in the Vatican.
Yep.
During the signing of the Lateran Treaty with Mussolini in 1929, and of course also with the signing of the Concordat with Germany in 1933. That's all correct, what you said there, Daryl, and important.
And we have to remember that Concordat and that helped Hitler rise to power and get total dictatorial power, because Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius XII, and his good friend Monsignor Ludwig Koss, who was one of the leaders of the German Centrum Party, they were the ones that made sure that the Roman Catholics in the politicians voted right down 100% for Adolf Hitler to get total dictatorial power. So we can thank Eugenio Pacelli and his very good friend Monsignor Ludwig Koss for helping Hitler get total dictatorial power in Nazi Germany. Thanks, guys. I just wanted to tell them thanks.
And that's the same with Montini. Montini later became Pope Paul VI. And he was the one, not Pacelli, he was the one in 1929 during the Lateran Treaty who was the Secretary of State to the Vatican. And he becomes later on Pope Paul VI. That's the Pope after John XXIII, who was the successor of Pope Pius XII, which was Eugenio Pacelli. And by the way, Pacelli has a very, very, very influential, rich and famous family in Italy. They controlled the banking through the Bank of Italy and all that stuff, and you can read of that in the book of Karl-Heinz Deschner, With God and the Fascists, a book that he originally wrote in 1965 that has been translated into English a few years ago. You can get that for, I bought it here in Europe for some $20, so it's about the same price there. It has 5 different chapters on. I can show you the German cover of that book. The English is not so much different. It's very interesting to read. In the first chapter it deals with the Vatican and the Italian fascism. So it speaks of the rise to power in Italy of Mussolini, who came into power in 1923, if I'm not mistaken. Then it speaks of the Vatican and the Spanish Civil War, which introduced, of course, the fascist Franco in Spain. Then it speaks of the Vatican and Hitler Germany. And then it speaks of the Vatican and the Second World War. And finally it speaks of the Vatican and the atrocious, how do you say that, the gruesome deeds of the Ustasha in Croatia during the Second World War. A very, very interesting book. This is just the German cover, but you can find that it is called With God and the Fascists, so not so hard to read even for an American. Get a hold of that book if you want to. This Karl-Heinz Deschner, he was born in 1924 and 1924, and died in 2014. He was an atheist, I tell you that right away, so you have to be careful when you read that book, but quote-unquote religion aside, the historical facts that he put together in this book are wonderful. And this book is based on writings of Avro Manhattan and Edmond Paris for a very big part. And those are also very reliable sources. This is a wonderful, wonderful book to understand that, and it speaks, of course, of the concordance and all that stuff, and it tells you in the first chapter where it speaks about how did I say the chapter was called? Sorry. The Vatican and the Italian fascism. It speaks numerously on the influence of the Pacelli family and who they all controlled and how powerful they were and still are. Everybody speaks of Eugenio Pacelli and nobody notices all the other people in the background. That's also something very intriguing and interesting in my understanding, at least. So this is a book that I can really advise people to have a look on, to read on. Yes, Bret, what you want to say, please?
Oh, I was just looking it up online. I don't know if I can find a PDF, but if I can, I'll provide a link in the description box of this
even
video.
If you don't find the PDF, just share a link in Skype. I can put up Skype to the maximum. We can share that link or that picture that you can show, and I can show that via Skype, and then we can show the English picture, of course.
Sure. I've got the picture of it. I was just looking at the PDF results here, and it's likely we can find it. It looks like there's some results here. But did you say you want me to send you an image of it in English?
Yeah, I'll send the link here, and then I can open the link here via Skype, or we do it this way. Or you share your screen when you have a big picture. That's also possible. Whatever works for you, brother.
Okay, yeah, here we go. I'll just send you the link. This is actually just pictures. Is that going to work?
Yeah, I guess so. Let me see when it comes up.
Okay, let me just quick get that for you, Jörg. All these different computer things you got to learn, you know? There we go.
Yeah, you know. But hey, that's live video, you know. And
it is.
People can
just
only learn.
Image results,
Yeah, people can only
Google.
learn from how it's done. And
Sure.
how we are doing these videos. Yeah, God and the Fascists. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Yep.
I didn't go to that page. So, the Vatican alliance with Mussolini, Franco, Hitler, and Pavelic. Yeah? So Mussolini in Italy, Franco in Spain, Hitler in Germany, and Pavelic in Croatia. Yeah? This is Franco, this is Mussolini, this is Hitler, and this is Pavelic.
Oh, there's such great details behind everything that we see in the world leaders. Of course, the world leaders are only there to give us a physical head of the empire, you know, so to speak, you know, because technically we're not, you know, the people don't know we're living in an empire. They just think, well, these are just nations. Well, yeah, but the nations have to do with the empire, and, you know.
This seems to be an interesting book. The Vatican Red Line. The Vatican, the Nazis, and the New World Order.
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we wanted to show this one. So this is God and the Fascists, and when we go to Google, it leaves us to Amazon. What's the price of that book? $14, you see?
Yeah.
So
right.
that's not so expensive, and that's even new.
No.
That's not even used. Kindle
Right.
book for $11, 30 new from $6, 41 used from $5.30 something. So you see, that's not so bad.
Yeah, I've seen this book before, Jörg. I know I've seen it when we were working on All Roads Lead to Rome. When I was doing that, I've seen that book before.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, another one like the other one. What was it? The book cover has the picture of Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius XII,
that's
in Berlin with the guards
Cromwell.
and
The book from Cromwell,
Cromwell.
Hitler's Pope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah, Yeah, it is. But this
Good book,
is,
John Cornwell.
yeah, John Conway. Yeah, this book is written in 1965 from Deschner, and I can really advise it. But you have to be careful with the author, of course, because he's an atheist, and an atheist cannot explain the real connections between religion and politics from a biblical view, of course, because he doesn't have a biblical view. So I think this is just one warning that I have to add to this. But for the rest, this is a very interesting book to read. I read in 4 sessions the fifth chapter on Croatia. I read the foreword, I read the afterword, and I read what is on the outside of the book. How do you call that? On the back side, what is that?
Sure, yeah, just like a foreword or a preface, or
no, it's
what would it be?
What is on the outside of the book? I forget the name. Umschlag.
The back cover.
The cover. Thank you. The back cover.
Yeah, simple. Yeah.
Yeah. The simplest words you sometimes don't get.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's
that was really an interesting read so far. I suggest that we go on for a small moment in our reading here to finish this interesting sentence, but to understand, to come back to the last sentence that I just read, I put here in green, that it really springs into the eye, jumps into the eye that you see this. Long after his absolute dominion was gone, the Pope had what were called concordats with different nations, and as Darrell said, 177, 178, 179, today 2019, in which it was agreed still until today in return for the Pope's spiritual support. Oh yeah, we need this Pope's spiritual support, because we are so stupid we can't read and understand the Bible for ourselves. We need the support of the Pope and of the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. We need a priest to tell us about God. We cannot just pick up a Bible and read for it ourselves. In return for this, the Pope's spiritual support, all the nations that have an accord with the whore of Babylon would uphold him by their armies and their navies. I don't think there's a better moment to end this broadcast today with this wonderful sentence which all brings it down. This is the epiphany of what we or the epitome of what we were talking about all this book. This one little sentence puts it all together. You don't need to understand more than this. The Roman papacy has concordats with almost every nation in this world, and in these concordants it is agreed that in return for the Roman Catholic Church's spiritual support, all the nations would uphold the Pope with their armies and navies. Bang! Point blank. Done. Finished. I'm done for today. And I give it to my brothers, Bret and Darrell, please.
Do you want to go first, Bret? Or do you want to wrap it up?
If you got something, please.
Yeah, I'm just holding that book, 70 Weeks, in my hand by Robert, and I'm not sure if any of us know his Caringola, maybe? Caringola. Mm-hmm. Caringola, I'm not sure of the pronunciation. It sounds almost Italian. But I'm holding that book in my hand, and he's got an interesting little appendix in the back, and we need to remember this. He's got a number of names listed, like Tyndall, Cranmer, Latimer, Ridley, Hooper. These guys all gave their lives. They weren't just threatened. They weren't just hunted down and hounded, which some of them were, but they were executed. They were murdered. Now, Tyndall got strangled at the stake. The other ones I just mentioned to you, I know Latimer and Ridley were, and I believe Hooper also. But they were burned, Cranmer was. They were burned alive at the stake. Burning, that's a kind of a cruel way to dispatch somebody, and often they were burned very slowly. So we need to remember that these men, they all recognized the office of the papacy as the Antichrist, and they gave their lives. They knew when they spoke out against it that they were going to be hunted down and killed. They knew that, and yet they still had the courage to speak out. So we should appreciate men like that and honor them. We should also appreciate the living ones, like Richard Bennett, the former Dominican priest of 22 years. He's at BereanBeacon.org. Great website, BereanBeacon.org. And Dr. Ronald Cook, who I had the privilege of speaking with him. I was one of the speakers, but he was the keynote speaker at a conference in Maryland. Dr. Ronald Cook wrote two great books he's written a lot of books, a lot of booklets and pamphlets, but Dr. Cook is in his early 80s, and he wrote The Antichrist Exposed. Antichrist Exposed in 2 volumes, over 740-some pages, where he gives you all of the different, all of the reformers had to say about who the Antichrist was. And by the way, the reformers, and he also mentions Albigenses, Waldenses, and the Puritans, the Congregationalists, and all that. But all of the reformers, the major reformers, they didn't agree on everything, but one thing they all agreed on, and that was that the office of the papacy was the historic Antichrist. The office of the papacy was the Antichrist, and we need to remember that the Jesuits came along, and one of the things they did was they choreographed and orchestrated 2 different prophetic views than the historicist view. And those views were preterism, which means, the Antichrist was way in the far distant past, don't worry about him, or futurism, and that means that the Antichrist, he's way far off in the future, don't worry about it, you'll be gone before he gets here. But the thing was that these 2 Jesuit views, which conflict with each other, but they both had the same purpose, and that was to get the spotlight, to take the proverbial spotlight off of the papacy as being the office of the papacy, as being the historic view of the Antichrist being the Antichrist. So again, remember, a number of people gave their lives to express that truth and get that truth out to people. So again, great that we're doing Albert Close. I really like Albert Close, and I got his one book, From Elizabethan to Modern Times, Jesuit Plots from Elizabethan to Modern Times, and that has the story of the Spanish Armada in there, and how the Pope paid off the Spanish king to launch that. Well, he was going to give him a whole lot of money, but he reneged on it, because the mission failed. But God, I believe, brought those horrendous winds up that caused those ships to fail in their mission of landing Roman Catholic Spanish troops in order to turn England back into a fiefdom of a slave to papal Rome again. And God's hand intervened, as he did with the 185,000 Assyrian troops that got toasted, got killed, because God decided they weren't going to take Jerusalem, and God intervened, as Jörg, I believe, pointed out earlier, and stopped the Spanish Armada. So anyway, that's a good note to close on, that we've had.
It sure is.
God
Darryl.
Intervene.
Yes. Wonderful. I'm really, really thankful for both of you joining me today and getting this message out to our dearly beloved brethren that live in all corners of life, all around this earth we live on. So, in that spirit, we hope to catch up with you next time. And I guess we're going to close it up. And if there isn't any final words, I will just say, Maranatha, see you next time. Bye-bye.
From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lusts that war in your members? Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. Do ye think that the Scripture saith in vain, the Spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy? But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted, and mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. Speak not evil one of another, brethren. He that speaketh evil of his brother, and judgeth his brother, speaketh evil of the law, and judgeth the law. But if thou judge the law, thou art not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who art thou that judgest another? Go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow, we will go into such a city, and continue there a year, and buy, and sell, and get gain. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor, that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. But now ye rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is evil. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire.